February 18, 1945. Near Cologne, Germany, at 4:20 a.m., frost covered the field like glass. The soil was hard, the air sharp with diesel and silence. A lone truck idled beside a collapsed fence, its exhaust whispering in the dark. Private First Class Andrew Keller stood near the hood, gloved hands pressed together, eyes fixed on the faint light seeping through the cracks of a distant barn. Somewhere beyond the mist, Cologne's ruins flickered under artillery flashes, steady, distant, impersonal. The truck's engine pulsed in rhythm with his breath. It was his duty to keep it running. His orders were brief, written in grease pencil across a ration card. Deliver diesel, await confirmation, return before dawn. Nothing about prisoners, nothing about voices. Through the still air came a sound that did not belong to machinery. A dull thud, followed by a man's breath breaking in short intervals. Then a count. 1, 2, silence. Keller's head lifted. Another blow. The count again, slower now. The rhythm was human, deliberate, disciplined. He looked toward the barn, where the generator's hum cut through the frost. Inside, 5 captured Allied soldiers were being questioned by the 9th SS Interrogation Detachment. The unit insignia on their trucks still glistened with condensation, black lines under a pale moon. Regulations were clear. No interference. The logistics line served function, not conscience. Keller was a transporter. Diesel, oil, rations. He was not to listen. He was not to think. Yet each sound from the barn pressed deeper, aligning with the low pulse of the idling truck. He remembered his sergeant's phrase, "Systems run on silence." But this silence felt wrong, artificial, held together by fear instead of order. He glanced at the power line running from the generator to the barn. Frost clung to its black sheath, catching faint light. One movement of his hand could sever it. One switch flipped, and the interrogation would end in darkness. He traced the outline of the panel mounted on the truck's rear gate. It hummed faintly, the current alive beneath metal. He thought of the men inside, voices foreign yet familiar. The flat Midwestern accent of a mechanic, perhaps? The clipped tone of an officer trying to stay calm? It was the sound of his own language coming back distorted through war. Keller pressed his thumb against the switch casing. His breath fogged the air. For a second, the hum of the generator grew louder, like the system itself noticing his hesitation. He imagined the circuit, fuel to power, power to light, light to fear. Every unit fed the next. That was how the machine sustained itself, by motion, not by mercy. Still, his hand remained. The frost under his boots cracked quietly. Somewhere in the distance, a train moved through the fog, its rhythm slow, indifferent, perfect. Keller exhaled once. Then, without a word, he reached out and cut the line. The hum died instantly. The barn's lights blinked, stuttered, and vanished. Silence expanded across the field, pure, cold, unbroken. For a moment, even the truck seemed to hold its breath. By dawn, Keller would log the outage as fuel line overload. The interrogation would not resume. The prisoners would be moved. No citation, no reprimand, no medal. Only the empty notation of a system momentarily interrupted. Years later, in an after-action report, his name would appear once, "Delivery maintained despite electrical fault." Nothing more. The system endured. The war continued. But for 6 minutes, on a frozen field near Cologne, a man had chosen failure over function. Before the war, Andrew Keller had worked beneath the steady pulse of turbines in an Ohio power station. He was 23, quiet, methodical. His hands moved with mechanical precision, tracing copper coils and pressure gauges until every hum aligned. He liked the order of it. The hum meant life. The silence meant fault. His foreman once said Keller could hear imbalance before an instrument showed it. He never argued, never improvised, only adjusted until systems behaved. Violence had no place in that rhythm. When war came, It did not ask for his preference. The Army gave him a uniform, a truck, and a new sound to memorize. The growl of 6-cylinder engines pulling weight through mud. He adapted the only way he knew. Every morning, gloves folded in the same pocket. Every refuel, a cigarette after the gauge needle rose. Every engine logged by sound. His convoy logbooks were cleaner than field orders. Temperature, vibration, fuel pressure, distance. His handwriting never shook. It was his form of control in a world that refused it. Other drivers called him the clock. Slow, exact, and unbreakable. But Keller didn't hear it as praise. To him, it was duty. He had learned early that a system's strength depended on silence between its parts. On the road, his senses became his instruments. The smell of hot oil meant strain. The pitch of exhaust told him when the mixture was off. Even the cold carried data. Frost changed the sound of tires, made the road hum differently. He knew these signs the way soldiers knew the weight of their rifles. When men cursed the mud or the dark, Keller listened. Patterns calmed him. Predictability kept him human. In winter, near Liège, he once stopped an entire line of trucks because he felt an unfamiliar vibration under his boots. Others didn't hear it. 10 minutes later, a differential cracked open from overstrain. His sergeant said it was luck. Keller called it noise. To him, machines spoke honestly if you knew how to listen. That instinct, the subtle difference between order and collapse, became the skill that carried him through war. But war taught him another kind of silence. Not the clean pause of machinery shutting down, but the kind that followed impact. The kind that arrived after men shouted and then didn't. He learned to separate the two. One demanded repair. The other demanded endurance. In his mind, both were mechanical failures. One fixable, one not. By 1945, Keller's world had narrowed to a single route between supply depots outside Cologne. Same truck, same diesel smell, same checklist before dawn. Yet on that night, the silence changed tone. The field didn't sound asleep. It sounded listening. The generator's rhythm was wrong, uneven. The air felt heavier, carrying voices that didn't belong in the mechanical pattern. Counting, measured, human. He stood beside his truck and heard the difference the way he'd once heard a failing turbine. Something in the system was straining beyond tolerance. The power running to that barn wasn't feeding machinery anymore. It was feeding cruelty. And he was the only one who could interrupt it. Keller's hand stayed on the ignition longer than necessary, feeling its tremor through metal. Silence had always been his teacher. That night, it became his conscience. Would you have listened closely enough to know? By February 1945, the Allied advance moved not on courage, but on combustion. Every tank mile, every artillery barrage depended on convoys like Keller's, the 62nd Fuel Transport Company. Anonymous lines of trucks threading the frost-bitten arteries of the Western Front. From Antwerp to Liège, through the Ardennes and across the battered remains of the Rhine, the system pulsed. Each truck carried what regiments required to exist. Diesel, oil, spare parts. Gallons, not glory. The war's momentum was measured in consumption. Keller understood that better than most. To him, logistics wasn't background. It was the organism itself. The 62nd ran on precision. Timing was the defense. Every truck left the depot within seconds of schedule. Headlights blacked out, convoy spacing exact. Drivers memorized curves, bridges, and gradients, the way infantry memorized enemy positions. A single delay rippled through divisions. On clear days, they could see the white smoke of artillery far ahead, proof that fuel had reached where it was meant to. The system worked because it had to, and because men like Keller believed in function over feeling. By winter, routes changed daily. Roads vanished under rubble or shell fire. Temporary bridges groaned under columns of armor. Dispatchers adjusted timetables by the hour. There was no romance to it, only maintenance. Yet beneath the order lay chaos disguised by paperwork. A form stamped "cleared" could hide anything behind the ink. That night, the order came in routine phrasing. Deliver 400 gallons diesel to Farmstead 19C. Secure and cleared. Use secondary approach. No coordinates, just the code. Keller's unit had one standing rule: never stop near occupied structures. It existed because soldiers, saboteurs, or civilians could turn any building into an ambush. But the war's last months blurred rules. The headquarters directive overrode the Field 1, so Keller drove where paper told him to. The farmhouse stood alone on a low ridge east of Cologne. Its roof sagged under frost. Smoke rose thinly from a rusted vent. 2 German trucks already stood outside, engines off, their insignia half frozen beneath mud. A generator hummed beside the barn, steady, industrial, alive. Keller noted the power draw, too high for mere lighting. The line ran directly into the barn wall, thick cable reinforced with cloth wrap. He logged the delivery in his book. Time 04:15. Transfer complete. Awaiting confirmation. Then he waited. Regulations said to keep engine running, stay by vehicle, await signal. The hum of the generator grew heavier as the air cooled. Inside the barn, voices carried through timber. At first, they blended with the mechanical noise. Indistinct syllables, the kind heard across any depot or repair site. But then came English, soft, deliberate, wounded. A man counting between impacts. Another voice asking questions. Keller froze. He had heard English before. Radio intercepts, POW broadcasts, fragments of captured speech. But this sound had weight. Not broadcast, not translation, immediate, real. He stepped closer to the truck bed, listening through the vibration of the fuel drums. The rhythm was wrong. Not work, not order, something else. The generator stuttered under load. He could feel it through the soles of his boots. The imbalance of current. Somewhere in the system, something resisted the flow, like machinery under strain. He followed the cable with his eyes to the barn door. Light bled through the cracks, trembling with each fluctuation of power. The hum grew harsher. Then came a silence, the kind that doesn't rest but waits. Keller understood. The paperwork had lied. The structure wasn't cleared, it was occupied. And the power he delivered didn't sustain an operation. It sustained an interrogation. He wrote nothing down. No driver ever did. Systems men weren't meant to question what their engines powered. He looked once more at the cable. Steam rose from its insulation where frost met warmth. The war's machine was still running, but it was running on something broken. He turned back toward his truck, hands on the ignition, mind on the rule he was about to violate. In war, orders feed systems. Systems feed victory. But sometimes, silence feeds truth. The road in had felt wrong from the first mile. Frost had hardened the ruts, but the tread marks were too recent. Wide spacing, sharp ridges, not Allied tires. They ran counter to convoy direction, overlapping like tracks from a hurried withdrawal. Keller noticed, then noted nothing. Drivers were not to interpret terrain. Still, the pattern stayed with him, the uneven rhythm of the road under the truck's weight. By habit, he read surfaces as others read maps. Each bump, each hollow told a story of what had passed. This one told him something foreign had moved ahead. At the farm road junction, he found a discarded ration tin half buried in ice. The label was printed in Gothic script. He turned it once, saw grease stains still soft to the touch. Germans. Recently fed. He placed it back where he found it. Regulations were clear. Do not stop longer than 2 minutes outside delivery perimeter. The stopwatch on his wrist ticked steady as he climbed back into the cab. Diesel smell filled the cabin, dense and chemical. His breath fogged the windshield, then cleared again. The engine idled low, a constant hum beneath the night's silence. By the time he reached the barn, frost had turned the fields to pale glass. The blackout lamps painted narrow cones of dull yellow along the mud track. A wind moved through the trees, thin and even. It wasn't enough to explain the faint vibration Keller felt under his boots when he stepped down from the truck. It came at intervals, soft and distant. The shudder of machinery misaligned, the kind he'd once heard in power stations before bearings failed. He stood still, counting seconds between tremors. 5. Then 7. Then nothing. The vibration stopped, as if it had noticed him. He walked around to check the barrels. Each was marked with a requisition code. F19C. The number was ordinary. The prefix was not. He had seen it once before, printed on a captured manifest after Bastogne, belonging to a German refueling group. A falsified code meant diversion. Someone had redirected the shipment through paper, not command. Still, the order bore Allied stamps. He rubbed the corner with his thumb. The ink smudged too easily. It hadn't dried under a depot lamp. It had been written by field torch. Inside the barn, a single bulb flickered. The light pushed through cracks in the wall, dull and rhythmic. Keller's logbook lay open on his lap as he waited in the cab, pen steady over the line labeled confirmation signature. It remained blank. No one came out. Regulations demanded he wait 15 minutes. He checked his watch. 7 had passed. The generator coughed once, then recovered. A new vibration followed. Softer, but more human. Then, from behind the boards, came a voice. Not shouting, calm, American, counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm precise, mechanical, deliberate. Then a pause, followed by another voice. German, low and clipped. Keller froze. The counting resumed, slower this time, strained between words. A sound followed, muffled, heavy, rhythmic again, but now unmistakable. Impact. The generator hummed harder, masking it halfway. He looked toward the power line feeding the barn. The cable was warm to the touch, its sheath sweating condensation in the cold. Power demand too high for lighting. It was driving something heavier, or feeding a circuit meant to isolate. Keller's hand went instinctively to the ignition key. The truck's hum steadied, faithful as always. He remembered training lectures about procedure. Never interfere, never question operational intent. Drivers delivered fuel, intelligence delivered meaning. But Keller's world had always been made of patterns, and patterns did not lie. Every vibration, every delay, every flicker. They built a message louder than the voices inside. He watched the bulb flicker again. The timing matched the sound of the counting. The system was sending a signal, though no one meant it to. It told him something had gone wrong. Not with machinery, but with men. Keller's breath fogged the glass once more. The ignition key trembled under his fingers. The hum of the truck and the generator blended into one long, uncertain note. He knew what came next would not be written in any logbook. Machines, he believed, never lied. Only men did, and somewhere inside that barn, the system itself was screaming the truth through its circuits. He weighed the decision like a mechanic testing voltage. Quiet, exact, and personal. The order was simple: complete, report, depart. Nothing more. No mention of voices. No mention of conscience. But the system had given him 2 languages to obey: command and current. And one of them was beginning to stutter. Keller stood still, hand resting on the junction box, listening. The generator's rhythm had lost uniformity. A mechanical pulse that once ran steady now skipped. A small human hesitation in a machine built for obedience. Years in power stations had taught him to read such changes not as error, but as message. Systems spoke through failure, and this one, he sensed, was speaking to him. The night around him was still. The truck idled behind him, its exhaust forming a slow ghost in the cold. Inside the barn, sound moved in waves. Thuds, counting, silence. Thuds again. Keller's breath fogged as he mouthed the sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, until he realized he wasn't just listening to pain. He was listening to timing. The rhythm matched the vibration from the generator. Same intervals, same pause. The two systems had synced. The machine was carrying the sound of human endurance, amplifying it through the field as steady signal. He replayed the order in his mind. Deliver to site. Maintain power. The phrasing was clear, but its precision now felt brittle, like a bolt over-tightened until threads stripped. He had followed orders his entire service. Convoys to the Ardennes, bridge depots on the Meuse, field repairs under shell fire. Discipline had kept the fuel flowing, but discipline had also taught him another truth. When systems overload, they fail catastrophically unless someone intervenes. That intervention wasn't disobedience, it was maintenance. He thought back to his first job in Ohio, standing beside a turbine the size of a truck. His supervisor's voice still rang in memory. "You don't wait for a system to burn. You adjust before the smoke." He looked at the power line feeding into the barn. Steam curled faintly from the insulation, rising into the frost. The machine was already heating beyond its design. He imagined the current pushing through circuits, power drawn by force, not need. He saw it for what it was, a system running on corruption. He unlatched the box cover. The metal hinge creaked, soft as breath. Inside, the fuse line glowed dull orange under load. The hum deepened. He hesitated. Procedure said report malfunction to superior. But there were no superiors here. Only an order written by someone far from this field, blind to what the system had become. Keller looked back at his truck, at the quiet, loyal engine that had never lied to him. Machines, he thought, obey physics, not politics. He wrapped his glove around the lever. The steel was cold enough to bite through fabric. A small arc hissed as he gripped tighter. He didn't pull hard. Just enough. The generator coughed once, then fell to a lower tone. Inside the barn, the bulb flickered. Shadows shuddered across the boards. The counting stopped. Keller held the lever halfway. Not off, not on. Starving the current without severing it. It was a mechanic's act, not a rebel's. A controlled imbalance. Enough to make the system hesitate, to buy time for something human to survive inside its machinery. The air smelled of hot metal and diesel. He exhaled slowly, steady as a line depressurizing. For a moment, there was perfect equilibrium. The hum of the truck, the dying rhythm of the generator, the stillness between. He had disobeyed no one, yet nothing would ever read the same in his logbook. Systems could lie, circuits could carry cruelty, but a man could still adjust them. Not destroy, only recalibrate. He released the lever and stepped back, watching frost settle again on the cable. The power continued in weak, uneven current. Neither failure nor obedience, just pause. That night, Keller didn't break the machine. He corrected it. The light inside the barn pulsed twice before dying. Then, a void. For a second, the field held its breath. Frost still clung to the fence wire, unbroken, while the hum that had anchored every sound dissolved into nothing. In its absence came disarray. Boots scraping concrete, voices sharp, metal dragging in haste. Keller stayed still by the truck, gloved hands resting on the open door. His engine idled at low throttle, the sound muffled by the cold. The silence that followed was not peace. It was pressure, released. The generator coughed once more, its bearings whining, then fell dead. A thin whiff of hot oil drifted out from the vented casing. Keller waited, eyes on the cable line he'd weakened minutes before. It sagged now, limp, the last current spent. Inside the barn, someone barked an order, words clipped, furious. He caught one phrase, power loss. Then boots again, then stillness. He knew the sound of collapse, mechanical or otherwise. The still air had the same density as a dead engine, the kind that would never restart. The discipline drilled into him, complete, report, depart. felt small beside what now hung over the field. Somewhere between those 3 steps, a line had been crossed. He had interfered. No medal, no record, only the quiet of consequence. He climbed into the cab, movements measured, deliberate. The metal seat was cold through his coat. He turned the key halfway. The truck answered with a muted click, then life. The diesel motor caught slow, coughing up a gray breath before settling into rhythm. He eased the clutch. The tires rolled backward across frozen mud, crushing ice in muffled snaps. No lights, no horn, only the sound of distance forming. Behind him, the barn erupted, a single crack, sharp and clean. Then silence again. Not a firefight. Just one gunshot, the kind that ends something, not starts it. Keller's head turned slightly, eyes fixed on the mirror. Nothing moved except a faint line of smoke seeping from the roof. Not thick, not rising fast, just enough to mark transition. He shifted into neutral halfway down the slope, letting gravity take over. The barrels in the back clinked softly against their restraints. The half-empty ones resonated, hollow and metallic, like instruments finding tune. To anyone else, it was noise. To Keller, it was signal. Proof that pressure had equalized, that a line had been restored to balance. He reached the bottom of the incline and stopped. The field opened before him, pale with frost, the horizon dim with the promise of dawn. The convoy route waited somewhere beyond the trees, still unaware that one of its arteries had just redirected itself. Keller didn't write the event in his log. He tore out the page that bore the requisition code and let the wind take it. He stayed there until the first light broke across the east. It washed the field in cold gray, softening the outline of the barn in the distance. Smoke rose faint and thin, barely visible against the whitening sky. It carried no sound, no sirens, no pursuit, only the normal rhythm of morning. Wind in wire, the faint metallic drip from his truck's exhaust, a rhythm returning to order. He understood what he had done only through mechanics. Machines under strain release energy or die. Systems are no different. A release, however small, prevents the burn. He had not revolted. He had maintained. When the sun finally cleared the tree line, he shifted the truck into gear and rolled on, leaving the field to its silence. The war continued elsewhere, unchanged. His act would never be recorded, never named. But in that 1 hour before dawn, a system had paused long enough to remember it could be corrected. Would you have called it disobedience or repair? At 6:40 a.m., frost still clung to the grass outside Cologne. Allied patrols, advancing with rifles low and steps deliberate, found 5 men huddled in a roadside ditch. Their hands were bruised but free. The men were American, air crew shot down weeks earlier and marked as missing. They spoke little at first, stunned by daylight. Then one of them said there had been shouting, a light failure, confusion. In the dark, they'd slipped from their captors and followed the sound of a departing truck engine moving west. No one had fired after it. By the time the patrol reached the barn, only traces remained. The structure was half burned, the generator still warm but silent. Papers littered the floor. Scorched requisition tags, a few marked F-19C. The interrogation unit had vanished before sunrise, taking records and command staff with them. Somewhere, an order chain had collapsed. What had begun as a blackout had become an erasure. Hours later, Keller's truck rejoined the main convoy near Düren. The others were already lined up for inspection, engines idling, fuel drums frosted, headlights dulled with mud. Keller's arrival drew no notice. Convoy men returned late all the time. Bridges down, roads blocked, mechanical faults. When the operations officer finally called him forward, Keller produced his clipboard, clean and factual. Under remarks, one line read, "Delay, generator malfunction." The code was logged and approved without comment. He saluted, refueled, and parked in formation. The next morning, a routine broadcast played over the field radio. Weather, troop reports, logistics. Then came one line that broke the rhythm. Unidentified interference in German communications disrupted command relays near Cologne. The announcer moved on, the sentence absorbed by static. No one in the depot paid it much attention. Fuel distribution schedules continued. Trucks rolled out in sequence, engines droning in synchronized intervals. To most, it was just another data point in a war of numbers. Keller stood by his truck, wiping frost from the windshield with his glove. The broadcast faded. Behind him, the depot generator started up, its hum steady and strong, a sound he had known all his life. He listened, measuring its rhythm without thinking, waiting for the small irregularities that told him when a system was about to fail. None came. For the first time in days, everything ran clean. He didn't mention the barn, didn't mention the flicker or the counting or the single gunshot that broke the night. His diary for February 18th held only coordinates, mileage, and fuel balance. No reflection, no confession. The systems of war left no room for either. Still, in the quiet moments before dawn, convoys rolled, he found himself listening, not for engines or voltage, but for absence. That same silence that had once spread across the frozen field near Cologne, when every circuit went dark and every human sound paused in recognition. The war moved on without him. New orders, new routes, new shortages. Months later, when Germany surrendered, Keller was still in service, maintaining fuel lines for the occupation. No one ever asked about the generator failure. No report was filed, no correction made. What he had done existed only between circuits. A brief interruption, a human pulse inside a mechanical system. Years later, he would describe the war not in battles, but in sounds. The drone of engines, the tick of relay switches, the silence between. That silence, he said, was the only command that had ever felt true. Would you have obeyed it? By the time Keller's company reached Remagen, the front had already shifted east. Roads that once carried convoys now ran in two directions. Supplies forward, prisoners back. The Rhine Bridge stood under constant traffic, engines rumbling day and night, a steady pulse of the Allied machine pressing deeper into Germany. Amid the flow, Keller's name appeared on a brief order slip from Intelligence Command. It requested clarification of logistical irregularities near Cologne, February 18th. The inquiry took place in a requisitioned farmhouse outside Bonn. The room smelled of oil and damp paper. A typewriter clicked from the next table as officers processed field claims by the hundreds. Keller sat upright, uniform pressed, clipboard on his lap. Across from him, a major read from a thin folder. "Generator malfunction," he said, tapping the line with a gloved finger. "No incident report filed. You confirm this?" Keller nodded once. "Yes, sir. Power line fault, overload from cold start." The major wrote something brief, then looked up. "Any casualties?" Keller shook his head. "Negative, that was all. 7 lines of text, each procedural. No follow-up questions, no cross-reference to missing interrogation reports, no mention of prisoners found in the ditch." Within hours, the paperwork was sealed into an envelope marked inconclusive. In a war powered by systems, ambiguity often closed itself. He was dismissed with a nod. The convoy moved again that afternoon. Weeks later, Keller drove across Germany one last time. Empty trucks now, heading west toward depots being dismantled. The war's weight was lifting, replaced by silence too large to measure. Fuel drums rattled hollow. Engines idled without urgency. He noticed the new stillness, not as relief, but as imbalance. A system winding down. On VE Day, he stood beside his truck, listening to the last convoy whistle fade through the hills. He returned to Ohio that summer. The factory where he'd once worked reopened under civilian contracts. The turbines still hummed, slower now but steady. He resumed the same job without ceremony: inspection, maintenance, repair. His co-workers said he was quiet but precise. He logged hours in neat columns, just as he had in the war. He never spoke of convoys or fuel codes. The closest he came was a single rule he never broke again: no machine left running unattended. Years passed. The men who'd served beside him scattered through the country. Some mechanics, some truckers, some gone before 50. Keller stayed. He married late, built a small house near the river, and kept the workshop behind it clean enough to smell like kerosene and graphite. The neighbors knew him as reliable, punctual, deliberate, almost mechanical in habit. None of them knew that one cold morning in Germany, he had cut power to a system that demanded obedience. In the official record, Keller remained what the paperwork said: efficient, consistent, unremarkable. The archive box bearing his name still sits under a line item stamped Cologne. Inconclusive. But the truth lived elsewhere. In the silence he'd created that night, it was not rebellion. It was maintenance of something larger than machinery, the correction of a system that had gone off frequency. When asked once by a younger mechanic why he double-checked every gauge, Keller replied, "Engines don't forgive neglect." Then he returned to work, sleeves rolled, eyes on the dials, listening for the sound that told him when a system was lying. He received no medal, no citation, no letter of commendation, only the continued hum of engines that ran clean because he had once chosen silence over compliance. Would you have let the system keep running? History records victories through noise, through artillery fire, signatures, and parades. But the true shape of war often turns in silence, the kind that doesn't echo, doesn't headline, doesn't decorate. On February 18, 1945, one truck engine shut down outside Cologne, and no record shows why. In archives, it exists only as a line of code: power loss, unknown cause. Yet, within that absence, lived a choice that bent the system without breaking it. The Allied advance that week accelerated by inches. Fuel shipments on time, supply routes intact, radio intercepts unbroken. The war's machinery depended on men like Keller, drivers who never spoke, who followed timetables written in oil and smoke. Their obedience kept the arteries open. But obedience alone couldn't correct failure. The system, precise as it was, still required something human: the instinct to listen when rules turned hollow. Keller's decision wasn't defiance, it was adjustment, a small recalibration within a machine that had forgotten how to hear itself. Historians later mapped the Cologne collapse as a technical failure: loss of communications, disrupted interrogation relay, command delay of 2 hours. The paper trail ended at a requisition number that led nowhere. In reality, that gap in transmission saved 5 prisoners, stalled an interrogation unit, and fractured a link in the German defense network. Cause and effect remained buried under clerical phrasing. But systems record outcomes, not motives. And sometimes, that is how truth survives, hidden in plain procedure. Keller's name never appeared in reports. He returned home as a driver, discharged without distinction. His logbooks were clean, his maintenance reports accurate. Yet, the logic of his act remained embedded in the quiet principle every mechanic knows: when pressure builds, the right move is not to endure it, but to release it before it destroys the system. Machines, like wars, collapse not from noise but from uncorrected strain. Years after the war, the same lesson played out in factories, in power stations, in the silent hum of peacetime industry. Systems improved, stabilized, and multiplied, each built upon obedience, but also upon the few who adjusted what the rules could not. Men like Keller didn't lead columns or command battalions. They kept engines balanced. They made systems survive themselves. The victory was theirs too, though it left no signature. In the end, the files stayed closed. The line marked "generator malfunction" remains in the Cologne dossier, unedited, unquestioned, and unresolved. It sits there, still humming between words. Proof that silence sometimes outlasts noise. No medals accompany it, no footnotes expand it. Yet in that omission lies a form of clarity the war rarely allowed. Stability born not of power, but of restraint. The war's engines stopped long ago. Their echoes faded through Europe's steel and stone. But between the static and the silence, a pattern remains. A reminder that every machine, no matter how vast, depends on the one hand willing to turn it off. Would you have trusted the system to correct itself? Or listened when it began to lie?